Hello and welcome to my studio. This afternoon I'm going to be showing you how I do the basics of fur for any animal really. This should cover you for long fur, short fur, curly fur, you name it. First I go in and I block in all the midtones. This gives us the basis to build up the layers of the fur, and we can build up either the light and the dark tones from here. It's a basic underpainting that helps us map out the structure and the proportions of the portrait we're doing. Blocking in the midtones helps us find our lightest lights and our darkest darks as the portrait progresses. As you can see, while I'm blocking in these dark areas, I'm making sure that my pencil strokes are going in the direction of the fur at all times. This helps define the muscle structure of the animal. It is quite important that we maintain this throughout the portrait. If we get it wrong or we change the direction of the fur, it can change the whole structure of the animal and it can throw the proportions off, making our portrait look strange. It is important to pay close attention to our reference photo at all times and to keep looking backwards and forwards. This way we make sure we don't make any mistakes and we're not making things up as we go along. It is quite easy to fall into the trap that we know what we're drawing, but this is often not the case. I've done it myself, so I always make sure that I am always referring back to my reference photo at all times. I'm still blocking in the midtones here. When this is done, we can then start thinking about refining the details and the shapes and making sure we're happy with the placement of everything. It is worth taking our time, making sure we're happy with the placement of all our tonal values, as this is the basis of the rest of our portrait. So if we get this wrong, then it can throw the rest of the portrait off. As you can see, I've started on the second layer now. I'm bringing in some lighter tones to the fur, and also I've started adding some greys. There is a grey tone to this part of the dog's fur, and it's worth paying close attention to your reference photo, as there will be colours that you don't expect to see in all animal fur. It is important when we're painting any portrait that we pay a close attention to detail throughout. I continue this throughout the rest of the layer, softening any parts that I need to with my pencils as I go. Soon it will be time to start bringing in some detail. This is where the beauty of pastels comes into their own. I can now start building up the lights on top of the darks, and this is very much how fur is in real life. You start with the dark fur nearer the base of the animal or the skin of the animal, and as you work out, the fur gets lighter. As you can see, I'm coming in with my darker pencil and I'm making more fur-like strokes. I'm still not doing individual strokes of fur, but I am trying to fill in the shapes that the fur creates. Often you find that fur forms shapes and shadows, and we want to start at building this up. It is helpful for us to look for the shapes that fur creates. It helps us not get bogged down in too tiny a detail, which we don't really want to worry about until the end of the piece. When we have finished the portrait, or the majority of the fur, we can then go in with the finer details right at the end, but until then it's just about building up the layers and creating depth. As you can see, I've been going in with more and more pencil strokes, beginning to build up the layers, and the fur is beginning to take shape. We still need to pay attention to the values and also the direction our pencil strokes are going in, as we always want to keep the pencil strokes going in the direction of the fur. Another useful tip to remember is the length of the fur that you're drawing. If you're drawing short fur, keep your pencil strokes short. If you're drawing long fur, keep them long. If you're drawing curly fur, you'll need to draw them wavy. As this is a Labrador we're doing, the fur is fairly short, so my pencil strokes are reflecting this. Here you can see I'm using my lighter pencil to go over the dark areas. This is why I love pastels. It makes them a lot easier to use than coloured pencils, as with coloured pencils you always have to reserve the light areas, whereas you don't have to think about it with pastels, and you can always go in and add lighter marks or areas. Another point to remember is pressure while you're working on a piece like this. You don't want to go in too hard and too fast with your pencil, otherwise you're going to fill the tooth of the paper and then it will be harder to add layers later on. Pressure also has an effect on the pencil strokes you're making. If you apply light pressure, you're going to get thin and delicate strokes, which are great for working in fur. If you apply with hard pressure, you're going to get thick, dark, broad strokes, which probably aren't quite what you're looking for. So always pay attention to the pressure you are applying with your pencil. As you can see, I'm still working on the layers, adding in strokes, bearing in mind the direction of the fur, and I'll continue to do this until I've built up the layers enough and I'm happy that it's starting to look like fur. Here I'm using a purple pencil to glaze. The purpose of glazing is as it would be in any other medium. I'm very gently moving the purple pencil backwards and forwards over the areas I want to apply the purple pigment. This helps soften the marks below and push them back. It is a very useful trick and I often apply it between the layers of fur. I'm still building up the layers. There are many layers that go into creating fur, always paying careful attention to my reference photo. It is worth putting the time and effort in, as it really will show in the finished piece. So we've covered many of the basic points of drawing fur. First of all, blocking in your mid-tones, direction of the fur strokes, length of your fur strokes, pressure that you apply with the pencil, and layers. Not forgetting paying careful attention to the shapes that the fur makes as the light falls on it and creates shadows. Here I'm doing a bit of blending with my finger. I'm just very gently dabbing my finger over the whole of the piece to soften the marks that I've created below. I can then go back in and re-establish any shadows and highlights. It is another useful practice to apply between layers to create depth in your fur. I'm now beginning to go in with the final details. I'm using my lightest pastels to do this, and I'm using more delicate strokes to pick out the individual hairs. I still try not to get too bogged down with all the minuscule details, but this is the layer where you're going to add the final touches and the final highlights and even the final shadows. You really want to add punch to those shadows and highlights. It's what will really make your portrait stand out in the end. Don't forget, if you overdo it at any point, you can always soften it back down with your finger or gently glaze with another coloured pencil over the top. The beauty of pastel pencils or pastels is it's such a versatile medium. You can work in lots and lots of layers and you can rescue many mistakes. This is particularly so if you're working on pastel mat as I am here. There are many other great papers that pastel can be used on, and I will be discussing those in another tutorial coming soon. So I think it's pretty much finished now. I think you have got a good idea of how I work in pastels to create fur. You could carry on and add more details and layers if you wanted to, but I think it's pretty much done. So to summarise, my top tips for creating fur are: block in the midtones to establish the basic shapes and proportions of the animal you're drawing. Look for the shapes the fur creates. Either the shadows and highlights or clumps create shapes within the fur pattern, rather than worrying about each individual hair. It will help you see the proportions better and not get bogged down with tiny details. Direction. Always work in the direction of the fur. Length. Always replicate the length of the fur. Short strokes for short fur, long strokes for long fur. Build up your layers. Create layers. Fur on animals grows in layers rather than a single depth. We want to work in layers to add depth and create realistic looking fur. It helps you to blend the transitions between colours in your piece, the more layers you have also. Wait until the end layers to add the final strands and fur details. Don't need to worry about every single one. Pressure. Pressure affects your mark making. The lighter pressure you apply, the more delicate the strokes. The more pressure you apply, the broader and darker the strokes will be. Wait until the end layers to add the final details of fur. You don't need to worry about every single strand of fur being in exactly the right place. You don't want to get too bogged down with the details and with all the hairs being in exactly the same place as your reference photo, as you'll drive yourself insane. As long as you have the proportions, values and markings correct, you will be fine. The most important part of pet portraits or creating any animal portrait is to capture the essence and character of the subject you're trying to portray. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please take the time to drop a like or a comment below, and also subscribe to my channel to be updated of new videos as soon as they're released. Hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.